All right, good morning. This is Block 6, Section 1, The Changing Nature of American Politics, Jefferson's World to Jackson's. AP questions have sometimes asked questions that kind of sound like compare Jefferson's Democrats to Jackson's Democrats, or assess whether the Jacksonian period was really the era of the common man, like Jackson, like historians have traditionally labeled it. So it's a good question to ask, that how is American politics different when in 1800, when Jefferson won his first campaign for the White House, and in 1824, when Andrew Jackson first ran, and 1828, when Jackson first won his election to Congress, and then through the Jacksonian period in 1840, when you really start to see the modern way of conducting presidential campaigns emerge. Let's start with a basic look at who's voting. In 1800, when Jefferson became president, in most of the states, especially the states in the South, pretty strict property qualifications still remained for holding office and voting for people who held office. In the North, there was minimal property qualifications in the North. Sometimes just owning your own farm tools counted as owning property. But for people who didn't own their own farm tools, or people who simply worked for wages, they did not necessarily own property and therefore could not vote. Only a few states had full male white suffrage in 1800. Most states, even in the more egalitarian North, had some degree of property qualifications in 1800. In the South in 1800, you pretty much had to be a large landowner to hold office, and a fairly successful yeoman to even vote. South Carolina is a good example. You had to hold 2,000 acres of land to hold office, and 200 acres of land to even have the right to vote. So unless you were a successful yeoman in South Carolina, you weren't even voting, let alone having the ability to hold office. By 1824, by the age of Jackson, by 1824, 1828, most of those property qualifications are gone in the North and in the South. That pretty much by 1828, the states, this is that question about what changes did the American Revolution bring. A several decade-long loosening of property qualifications for voting, that by 1824, 1828, most states have universal white manhood suffrage, meaning that all white men, regardless whether they're rich or poor, yeoman or elite, poor white, factory worker, whatever, most states had full white male suffrage by 1824. That expansion of the electorate to a much larger percentage of citizens are voting in 1824 and 1828 than back in 1900, means that the candidates have to make themselves attractive to those poorer classes of citizens who now have the right to vote. And Andrew Jackson's kind of just the perfect guy for that. His celebration of the common man, the everyday guy, attracts a lot of those people who had gained the right to vote, even though they did not own property or much property in the preceding 25 years. So that's a huge change. The property qualification is generally gone. How presidents were nominated for office changed fundamentally. Back in the very first days of the Republic, the earliest days of the Republic, with Washington and Adams and Jefferson and Madison, people were chosen to run for president by members of Congress. The Congress caucused or gathered, and they said the Federalist all the Federalist representatives in Congress nominate John Adams to run for president. And all of the Democrat, Republican members of Congress caucused together. They got together. The word caucus, actually, it's a Latin word. It comes from a drinking vessel, where people would gather and drink and talk and do a bunch of stuff. The Democrat, Republicans in Congress would caucus, would get together, and they would say, we nominate Thomas Jefferson to run for president. By 1824, that power had left Congress and started to belong to the states individually. That Tennessee nominates Andrew Jackson to stand for president. Massachusetts nominates John Quincy Adams. Georgia nominates, whoever Georgia wanted to nominate. That power also comes a little closer to the people, that the people's representatives are closer to them in their state legislatures than they are in the federal legislature. So we're looking at another example of an increase in power of the people of the United States as opposed to their elites. Eventually, by about 1840, which is still in the Jacksonian period, this second-party system, candidates are nominated in convention, where the states send a number of people to giant conventions where they have a giant party and nominate someone. We'll talk more about that a little bit later on. So we are constantly, slowly, I'm about to sneeze. We are constantly, slowly becoming a little bit more democratic in our politics as we go on. We're becoming a little bit more modern in terms of running for office also. In the early years of the Republic, candidates did not run for office. They stood for office. That President Jefferson is standing for the office of president. And just in the two verbs that we use, standing versus running, kind of tells you everything you need to know about what the difference is. When we see a modern candidate, President Obama when he was running twice, or Mitt Romney or John McCain or whoever, they are literally running, it seems. They are constantly on the move. They are talking to people. They are giving speeches. They are, arguing. They're constantly going places. They're the ones giving speeches. They're the ones making points. They're the ones saying, vote for me. I want to be president. They are running as fast as they can, really, for office. Compare that to the idea of standing for office. Back in the early days of the Republic, in the age of Jefferson, it would have been very, very uncouth. It would have been very, very, very low class to say, I want to be president, vote for me. Thomas Jefferson kind of had to get John Adams, and all of them, kind of had to get his buddies to say, Thomas Jefferson is a great choice for president. And then Thomas Jefferson would kind of stand there and say, oh, no, not me. The burdens of office could never be successful. No. And then his supporters would say, yes, Thomas Jefferson. And of course, Jefferson is controlling his supporters behind the scene. But the idea was that you did not personally campaign at all. It was nothing that a gentleman would do to go out there and have the audacity to ask for someone to vote for you. They stood for office. They did not run for it. John Adams, that Jefferson and Adams, when they were running, they weren't running for president. They were sitting at home. Adams was sitting at home in Braintree, Massachusetts, and Jefferson was sitting at home in Monticello, and other people did all the running for them. And they said, vote for Adams. And Adams would say, oh, no. Vote for Jefferson, someone would say, and Jefferson would say, oh, no. But of course, they desperately both wanted to be president and kind of gave directions to their supporters, all the time. But now, by the 1820s, you actually have candidates going out there, talking to the people, listening to questions, giving speeches, having rallies, things that are much more familiar to us. We have politicians running for office. And because we have politicians running for office, campaigns begin to be different. By 1840, when William Henry Harrison is elected, by 1840, you have campaign posters, campaign songs, campaign buttons, campaign speeches, campaign directors, campaign managers, campaign, newspapermen, directors of media relations, like all the stuff that goes into a modern campaign, you pretty much have by 1840. Again, a more democratic, a little bit more rough and tumble way to do it. But so if you want to look at it thematically, which we always should, American politics became more democratic throughout the course of the early 18th century, from the age of Jefferson to the age of Jackson. The fact that property qualifications were gone, how presidents were nominated to run for office, how presidents ran for office as opposed to standing for office, and the nature of the campaigns all changed in a more rough and tumble, less elitist, more democratic direction by 1840, by the age of Jackson.